Welcome to Volume 2 of Flying Saucers Are Real. We'll present information on the famous Betty and Barney Hill abduction case, the star map work that tells us where those particular alien visitors originated, supposed autopsy of an alien being recovered in New Mexico, the Operation Majestic 12, MJ-12, magic papers, which I think are the most important documents ever leaked to the American public. Join us. There's no way in the world I can tell you everything you always wanted to know about flying saucers in one program or even 5. What I can do is sort of take you by the hand and lead you past the evidence that has led me to the conclusions that I've reached after 35 years of study. The evidence is simply overwhelming that planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. Some UFOs are alien spacecraft.
It came from this direction over here, which is toward the Holiday Inn, and just came straight up and then moved directly over us, and then out over across the bay and took a right-hand turn and went at a northeast direction and then blinked out.
The subject of flying saucers represents a kind of cosmic Watergate. That is to say, some few people in the governments of the United States, Canada, undoubtedly many other countries have known since July 1947, when 2 crashed flying saucers and their crews were recovered in New Mexico, that some UFOs are extraterrestrial spacecraft.
Area 51, that mysterious corner of the Nevada test site, is no longer much of a secret. The fact that secretive things go on here is a given, even to the Soviets, who make daily spy flights over the facility to take a peek at what's going on. It's the perfect place for secret things, but of course, that's no secret. 51 is ringed by the forbidden vastness of the Nevada test site, by the looming Groom Mountains, and by sparsely populated desert expanses. The few people who do live out here have no love lost for the military, but they're conservative, patriotic, and they mind their own business. You ever see stuff you can't explain?
Sure, lots of stuff.
Care to elaborate?
No.
U.f.o.s. Is there a government conspiracy to keep the truth from America? Tonight on the UFO Conspiracy, a team of investigators uncovers provocative new evidence.
We're dealing with a cosmic Watergate.
Thursday, October 11th, 1973, around dusk. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker were fishing at this site on the Pascagoula River when they say a strange craft emitting a bluish light came down and hovered just above the ground 30 feet away. Now living and working in Golden Meadow, Louisiana with his family, Calvin believes the U.S. government has knowledge of extraterrestrial life that it is hiding from the public.
I think the government more or less knows about them, but they're just scared to get it out in the public.
Do you think the United States government is keeping something from us about UFOs?
There's no doubt in my mind that they are.
Man is not alone in the universe. He's not alone in the neighborhood. Our future as Earthlings is tied in with space. The time to start thinking in those terms is now. There are three different categories of UFO sighting reports. First, the I.f.o.s, that is, UFO sightings converted into identifiable flying objects. People have seen all kinds of things, and most sightings can be explained. Having said that, let's forget Category 1 sightings. Category 2 sightings must also be dismissed. These are the reports for which there is insufficient information on which to base any kind of scientific judgment as to what was observed. If you don't have enough data, forget it. There's no point in wasting your time on those sightings. Finally, that leaves us only with the sightings in Category 3. These are the reports by competent observers of strange phenomena in the sky or on the ground, which the observer cannot identify, which remain unidentified after investigation by competent investigators, and which furthermore we judge to be manufactured objects based on the way they look, not just lights in the sky, and we deduce they were made someplace else based on the way they were observed to behave.
This home videotape was recorded during one of the trips to the Groom Mountains.
Okay. Good luck.
No way, did you see that move it did?
No, I didn't.
It went like this, it went woo, woo. Wow, how bright it's getting.
Look at it now.
Getting bright.
Not bright enough for me to get the sun of it.
Here, hold on, right here. Are you there?
No.
It's bright right now.
A major point I'd like to make in this program is that every large-scale scientific study of flying saucers has provided us with a substantial number of Category 3 reports. Competent observer, competent investigator, plenty of data, and every indication we're dealing with intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft.
This is one of three videotapes of a bright light in the skies over Gulf Breeze. This is another. People have flocked to the south end of the Bay Bridge in the past few weeks in droves over recent reports.
What brought you out here in the first place?
Curiosity. I'm a skeptic and I don't believe in flying saucers. I had to come to see for myself.
Well, what do you think now after what you saw?
Well, I'm still not convinced it's a flying saucer, but it's not a plane and it's not a helicopter. So whatever it is, I still haven't made up my mind.
Now, the largest study ever done, official, comprehensive, government-sponsored study of flying saucers, was completed, believe it or not, way back in 1955. The study was done by the Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio, a very well-respected research and development firm. Now, it was Battelle's job to go through 3,200 sightings from the Blue Book files for the period 1947 through 1952, and a very few thereafter. Every sighting report was eventually categorized as something or other. Aircraft, balloon, astronomical, miscellaneous, the insufficient information category, and of course the unknowns. Every sighting was evaluated as to quality, subjective evaluation, but a useful one. They put all this data together in a big fat report, Project Blue Book Special Report number 14. Now, unfortunately, the report itself has never been publicly distributed by the Air Force. Instead, what was given wide distribution was a three-part package. A press release, from which I'll quote in a minute, a supposed summary of this study, and I say supposed because unfortunately it has none of the data from the 240-some charts, tables, graphs, and maps. I don't know how you could call it a summary, but they did. And an official Air Force drawing of sort of a comic book flying saucer. And the thrust of this package was, look, we just finished this huge study of flying saucers. There's nothing to them, but soon we will be building things that look like saucers, and if you see one, don't worry about it, it's ours. That's what the public was told.
The United States Air Force, in discharging its responsibility for the aerospace defense of the nation, is called upon to investigate reports of unidentified flying objects. Two Air Force officers have over the years been very closely associated with this activity. Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence Tacker was formerly the chief spokesman for the Air Force on the matter, and Major Hector Quintanilla is now the chief of Project Blue Book. Major Quintanilla, what are the objectives of Project Blue Book?
The objectives of the program are twofold. They're the same as they have been since 1953 when the regulation was written. First of all, to try to determine if the UFO phenomena presents a threat to the security of the United States. And second, to determine if the UFO phenomena exhibits any technological advances which could be channeled into research and development.
There's nothing to hide.
There's nothing to hide at all.
This is a copy of the privately published version of Project Blue Book Special Report 14. It is kind of interesting that the press release didn't mention the title of the report, because surely some reporter would have said, what happened to 1 through 13? They were all classified at that time, and the Air Force certainly wasn't talking about them. Now, in the press release, the Secretary of the Air Force, mind you, Donald Quarles, said, quote, on the basis of this report, we believe that no objects, such as those properly described as flying saucers, have overflown the United States. Even the unknown 3% could have been identified as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been available, unquote. Well, let's look at the categorization of the 3,201 sightings. You'll notice that there are several different categories, psychological aberrations, that's a nice way of saying crackpot cases, but the ones we're interested in are the unknowns. And you'll notice that the percentage of unknowns wasn't 3%, it wasn't 6%, it wasn't 12%, it was 21.5%. 7 times greater than the public was told by the Secretary of the Air Force. I suppose if one were generous, one might say that he wasn't very good at arithmetic. Now, the skeptic at this point might say, hey, wait a minute now, you said earlier that they did a quality evaluation of all those sightings. How do we know that those unknowns aren't just those 2-second observations at 4 in the morning by the town drunks of the world? Perfectly legitimate question. Let's look at the quality evaluation of those same 3,201 sightings. The better the quality of the sighting, because of the background of the observer, the duration of observation, the circumstances, the more likely to be listed as an unknown. Exactly what you'd expect if the unknowns were really something different.
Say hello now to Derek from Norfolk. Hello, Derek.
Hello, Nick.
Hello. What do you believe in?
Well, I believe in the UFOs.
Do you?
I have seen a UFO, actually. I live in Norfolk. I used to be a security guard, so I used to wander around quite a bit at night time.
Yes.
And remember, at this point, we're dealing strictly with unknowns. Forget all the things that turned out to be Jupiter and Venus and searchlights on clouds and flocks of birds. I mean, the list is as long as my arm. First, what did they look like? Well, typically we're dealing with the unknowns, with apparently round, symmetric, seemingly metallic, disc-shaped objects, definite size, shape, surface texture, things sticking out that might be landing gear, might be antenna, might be decorations. We don't know. Those are interpretations. Typically, but not always, bigger in diameter than thickness, sometimes with a kind of dome, size ranging from, say, 10 feet in diameter up to perhaps 150 feet in diameter. That was the biggest category of unknowns, but there were also some very exciting reports of large cigar-shaped so-called motherships, into and out of which the little discs fly. Now, with just the physical description of these unknowns, the round ones, the huge mother-shaped objects, the huge cigar-shaped mother vehicles, we have no basis at all for saying these things come from off the Earth. Why not? Well, because there are at least 50 different companies down here on the surface of this planet that could build things that looked as I described. They built a lot of the stuff that's here at the Space Center. You know, Lockheed, NASA, Rockwell International, under contract to NASA, Boeing, and a bunch of other companies. It's only when we add into the picture the behavior of these unknowns that we're suddenly forced to concede that we're dealing with something of extraterrestrial origin. Because these round, metallic, disc-shaped objects were able to sit still in the sky, hover, move straight up, straight down, move forward and then back without turning around, move at extremely high speeds horizontally, say 8,000 miles an hour as observed on radar, make almost right-angle turns at high speeds like 2,200 miles an hour. All this rather unusual flight behavior, typically without any visible external ends, without any wings, without any tail, without any noise.
Area 51, that mysterious corner of the Nevada test site, is no longer much of a secret. The fact that secretive things go on here is a given, even to the Soviets, who make daily spy flights over the facility to take a peek at what's going on. A man who once worked at Groom Lake as a technician wrote this letter explaining how he inadvertently walked into the wrong hangar and saw what appeared to be a large metallic disc under a tarp. And an airman who worked at Nellis at a radar installation says he and his fellow servicemen watched over a period of 5 nights unusual objects flying over the Groom Mountains. He says the radar images indicate the objects zoomed into range at speeds of 7,000 miles per hour and then would stop on a dime, and that nothing we have is capable of doing that. The airman says that when word of his sighting got out, he was ordered to turn off his radar sensors for that area and told to keep quiet about the matter because it did not happen.
And I submit to you that back in the early 50s, there was no company on the surface of this planet that could, in quantity, because people often reported seeing whole flocks of these things, that could in quantity build things that both looked as I described and acted as I described. Because if they could, we Earthlings would no longer be building F-16s, 17s, 18s, MiG-29s, Mirage 5. The single most important thing about a flying saucer, from any government's viewpoint, is the potential for utilization of the technology for military purposes.
Major Quintanilla, what are the objectives of Project Blue Book?
First of all, to try to determine if the UFO phenomena presents a threat to the security of the United States. And second, to determine if the UFO phenomena exhibits any technological advances which could be channeled into research and development.
Since we are still building F-16, 17, 18s, MiG-29s, Mirage 5, then what people saw back then wasn't built here on Earth. And if it wasn't built here, it was built someplace else.
Continuing to receive downlink television from the forward bulkhead camera of the cargo bay of the orbiter.
Now, where do I think they're from? Well, I'll name specific star systems a little bit later, but just down the street in our local neighborhood. That's a concept I try to get people to understand. Within 54 light years of here, in all directions around us, there are about 1,000 stars. Of those 1,000 stars, 46 are similar to the sun. Not too hot, not too cold, not too old, not too new, a lot of other similarities, and might be expected to have planets and life. That's our focus, our local neighborhood.
Well, joining me now are eminent scientist and believer in extraterrestrial intelligence, Stanton Friedman. Stanton, if I can start with you. You are a nuclear physicist. You have your feet very firmly on the ground as a scientist, yet you believe in UFOs. How does this come about?
It's very easy, since 2/3 of the people who express an opinion about flying saucers say they're real, and the greater the education, the more likely to believe they're real. It would be surprising if I didn't. It comes because I've spent 38 years collecting evidence, reviewing data. I've lectured at 600 colleges. I get lots of feedback. I've published 70 papers. That gives you more feedback. I do a lot of investigation.
It's unlikely that anyone who's ever seen these photos will forget them. Odd shapes in the sky, accounts of laser-like blue beams, descriptions of alien creatures, and close encounters over the road.
And even though I had the photos right there in front of me, and he was telling me all this, it was still hard to accept because things like that just don't happen, A, in Gulf Breeze, and B, to us.
Burbank Tower, this is American Flight 812. Over. That's nothing from this world. You suppose the passenger saw it?
I doubt it. Most of them were asleep. But it was quite a jolt, Jeff. I'll check.
Good.
We'll get it ready for landing. And keep it quiet until we get instructions.
Right.
Okay, Danny.
We normally think of courage in spaceflight in terms of how brave anybody was to get on the top of this rocket with all that propellant sitting below you, or any of those others, crammed. Who knows what's going to happen? Our jet jockeys who take their chances in very sophisticated, unforgiving equipment. There's a different kind of courage that's required. That's the courage to fight for your ideas. What we find is that every step along the way, the guys with the new ideas were being hit on by the guys who say it can't be done. Not by guys who knew what they were talking about, but people who, for whatever reason, wanted to guard the status quo.
Vehicle rolling from tail south around 235° azimuth, northeast.
Something about your flight?
Yeah.
What happened, Jeff?
I saw a flying saucer.
Well, did you report it?
Yeah. Radioed in immediately, and they said, we'll keep it quiet until you land. And as soon as we landed, big army brass grabbed us and made us swear to secrecy about the whole thing.
If there's anybody out there that got started just a little bit before we did on his or her technological kick, what do they know that we don't know? And how much time head start could they have? There are stars out there that are 5 billion years older than the sun. That's billion. Surely we could give them 1 million years head start on us. We've only been around 1 million years or so, something like man. The solar system is 4.5, 5 billion years old. So surely somebody out there could have 1 million years head start. Within 54 light years of here, in all directions around us, there are about 1,000 stars. Of those 1,000 stars, 46 are similar to the sun. Not too hot, not too cold, not too old, not too new, a lot of other similarities, and might be expected to have planets and life. That's our focus, our local neighborhood.
Alleged abductions of humans by aliens have been around since the early 1960s. Betty and Barney Hill, a middle-aged New Hampshire couple, were reportedly snatched up by aliens in a flying saucer and eventually had their memories blocked. Since their case was made public, thousands of others alleged abductions have been reported all over the world.
This is Betty and Barney Hill. It's a very famous case. Took place in 1961. There's a whole book, The Interrupted Journey, television movie, The U.f.o. Incident, starring James Earl Jones. It was September 19th, 1961. Betty and Barney were driving home to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which is on the coast between Portland, Maine, and Boston, from Montreal. Driving through the White Mountains, late at night, nobody around. Betty spots a strange object. Barney was driving. She's looking out her side. A light in the sky, moving, following the contour of the mountains. And she watched it for a while. She wasn't going to say anything.
Suddenly, we began to see a strange light in the sky, which was maneuvering in a very erratic pattern. This light began flying along beside us, and did this for about 30 miles until we came to an area known as Indian Head.
Took the binoculars, they're bird watchers, took the binoculars out of the glove compartment, looked over at it, and it was strange, and it was moving in a strange fashion. Finally, she worked up enough courage to tell Barney. It's late at night now, after midnight. Barney, there's a flying saucer out there. Oh, Betty, there are no flying saucers. It must be an airplane. He looks, probably a Piper Cub. Don't worry about it. You know what a Piper Cub's doing up there at 1 in the morning, I don't know, but she says, Barney, it can't be. Look at it. Look how it's moving. Look at the lights. Oh, well, maybe you're right, Betty. It must be a helicopter. A helicopter. There are no flying saucers. And they talk quietly as they're heading south in the valley. This is following the hills. And suddenly it moves out across the road.
And at that place, this light left the top of the mountain, came out over the highway, and stopped in midair directly in front of us.
Barney jams on the brakes, gets out of the car. He's bound and determined. He's going to prove to Betty there's nothing strange about that strange thing out there. In the first place, it's sitting still.